Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International. It is Monday the 9th of October 2023 and this is program number 1069 of the Lunchroom. I'm your host Calixte George Jr. In addition to 101.1 FM radio, you can also follow us on YouTube. Just search for RCI, Radio Caribbean International. Of course, be sure to subscribe to our page and of course you can share that link as well with your friends and family. If you want to tell us what's on your plate today, the number to do so is 452-3046. Again, 452-3046. And you could also call in to our WhatsApp number if you're overseas. And if you have the app, of course, it's 758-724-0008. And just again, if you want to message in or call in to our WhatsApp number, it is the area code plus 724-0008. Some birthday wishes for today. First going out to Miss Penny Prosper. Happy birthday to you, Penny. And we do hope that you're having a splendid and wonderful birthday celebration. Hope you're enjoying your very, very special day. We're also sending birthday greetings to Mr. Tennyson Scott. Happy birthday to you, sir. And we do wish you the very best on your birthday. And we do hope you're having a fantastic celebration. Also sending birthday greetings to football legend here in St. Lucia, Mr. Earl Ja. Happy birthday to you, sir. And we do hope that you're having a wonderful birthday. Hope it's a grand one. Also sending birthday greetings to Miss Kira Kodra. Happy birthday to you. And we're wishing you a wonderful birthday. And also to Dr. Kentry Japierre. He's celebrating his birthday today and wishing you a fantastic and lovely birthday celebration, Dr. Japierre. And for those who are in fact celebrating their birthdays today, they would be celebrating it with John Lennon, with the Beatles fame. He died, of course, back in 1980. He'd have been 83 on this day. And also former British Prime Minister David Cameron. He turns 57 today. A bit of history. In the year 768 on this day, Charlemagne, Charles the Great, King of the Franks, and his brother Carloman, the first, are crowned King of the Franks. In the year 1000, Leif Erikson reached what is called Vinland, land of the vines or the vineyards or wine, possibly somewhere called Los Meadows in Canada, and reputedly becoming the first European to reach North America. In the year 1446, the Hangul, the Korean alphabet, is first published in Korea by King Sejong the Great. 1831 on this day, Ioannis Kappadostrias, the first head of state of modern Greece, assassinated in the city of Nafplion. In the year 1855, American inventor Isaac Singer patented the sewing machine motor. 1941 on this day, the birth of the nuclear program in the United States. U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt approves an atomic program that would become the Manhattan Project. And in the year 2006, North Korea conducts its first nuclear test with an estimated yield of 0.4 to 2 kilotons. And we now move on to our dish of the day. The Daily Dish is brought to you the kind compliments of our good friends at Tiles Plus.
One tiles for your home, I see. Bathroom, kitchen, pantry. Need tiles for your balcony. Come down to Tiles Plus, satisfaction guarantee. Tiles Plus, Tiles Plus, Tiles Plus. Big tiles with unbeatable cost. Customer service, A+. With all kind of tiles, come down to Tiles Plus. We also got gasway and vanity. Box, doors, you'll see. Come down to mind nobody. We got the best tiles on island. Trust me. We are located Lunchroom in Castries, Bosses, Jugos, and Slack Street in Beaufort. Telephone number 453-7939. Tiles Plus.
Serving now, the Daily Dish.
And welcome back to our program here at Radio Caribbean International's Lunchroom. Apologies that we weren't able to have a program last week, Friday. It was unfortunately unavoidable. But of course, we are back for an entire new week of programming here at RCI. And certainly what a weekend can do to change the world. It has certainly become a very much more active and concerning place as a result of what unfolded over in the Levant, in Israel, in the state of Israel, with an attack which has been put on the blame being put on by the terrorist group or the military group, that of Hamas. And we, of course, can very well appreciate that that part of the world has certainly been a hot spot for conflict for thousands of years. It finds itself in what is known as the Fertile Crescent, that region that spans from the Nile River Valley in Egypt, what is now Egypt, or formerly Kemet, and of course that rich area for the birth and the growth of civilization, and it crosses through that very narrow coastal plain, which is today the lowlands of Israel and Palestine, and stretches up into the more mountainous regions of Lebanon and into Syria, and then coming up into parts of Turkey, and then down again into the Tigris and Euphrates river systems, into modern day is Iraq. And so that area has been pretty much where civilization was born, and that narrow strip between the two major points of civilization and spread of civilization in the Sumerian region of the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, and across into the Egyptian civilization in the Nile River, and then in between you have that of Palestine. You have that region that has been effectively an interplay of many, many different empires, and the spread and the growth of empires as one waxed and the other one waned, and you saw massive action and warfare effectively going on in that region from time immemorial. And it has also been a very important interplay even beyond that, not just because of those two regions, but also the region of the Mediterranean. And a significant part of their history as well is, of course, also impacted by the spread of other empires, Mediterranean empires, whether they may have been the Phoenicians or the Greeks or the Romans, and so on and so forth. And so the conflict has been certainly very much present in the lives of those people who've lived there for all this time. And it has also been a place of great interaction, of great sharing and trading as a result of that as well, and bringing together of ideas from different parts of the world, different parts of these very same regions, which have in fact influenced what has occurred right there in the Levant, in modern day Israel. And of course, we have seen a number of religions coming out of that region. And of course, the three great monotheistic religions of the world, that of Judaism, that of Christianity, and that of Islam, all pretty much have its connection to the history of that region, that part of the world. And so here you have a pretty much a country that is seen, or a piece of land that is seen to be so important from a cultural and religious perspective for so many people, not just those who may live there right now, but for people all around the world. It in fact has great meaning and great significance. And of course, to the Jewish people, they see that as their promised land, the land promised as far back to Abraham and to his offspring. But of course, to Christians, they see it as the place of Christianity, the birth of Christianity, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, the place of his teachings and his crucifixion and his resurrection. And of course, we've seen over the hundreds and thousands of years as well, attempts by Europe as well to be able to influence and to control that region. The Crusades, which went on over hundreds of years as well. And of course, we also saw the rise of Islam, and even Jerusalem being also a very significant place, not just for the Jews, the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, the place where the temples existed and were destroyed by the Romans, and before that, the Babylonians, and that place also being very important to Muslims as well. And of course, I think their third most holiest site, finding itself on that very same spot where today we see the very famous dome, a very famous mosque existing, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right there on that site, on the Dome of the Rock. And so we can see why continuously, because of the fervor, because of the religion, because of the cultural and significance of it, the entire space, conflict has been flaring up time and time again. Back towards the beginning of the 20th century, this was after hundreds of years of, one can call even exile as a result of the actions of so many different kingdoms and empires coming in. The Jewish people have certainly been a people of more diaspora than even having a homeland, a scattered people, effectively. And certainly found themselves all around the Mediterranean, all around Europe, and were, of course, persecuted quite brutally by Christians, by people of medieval times. And so there were a number of instances where you saw the persecution of people of the Jewish faith. And of course, which led to many shifts and banishments from these countries. Very famously, of course, that occurred in Spain and Portugal, where Sephardic Jews had to flee those countries, had to leave those countries, and in many cases, many of them found themselves in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. And even in our part of, in the Eastern Caribbean, in Barbados, for instance, there still remains one of the oldest synagogues in the New World. And so the idea of Holocaust, when, of course, we saw that happen, those were things that were very deeply rooted. That sort of discrimination, that sort of hate was already very much the history of Europe. By the time we got ourselves into the 20th century. And the desire by some to be able to allow for that creation of what was called a Jewish homeland took root. And eventually, of course, those regions eventually became part of the British Empire. And the British took control, of course, of Egypt as well as Iraq and pretty much most of the Middle East. It was also, of course, also a time when oil was becoming very important back in the 1920s, and the search for and the control of those oil resources had become certainly even more crucial. And of course, within that mix, the decision, the Balfour Declaration, the idea to create a Jewish homeland became a lot more prevalent at that point. But certainly post-World War II, post the Holocaust and the killing of nearly 11 million Jews, that certainly forced the point for a lot of Europeans that there had to be some level of reparation in that matter. Unfortunately, the payment of return to a homeland, a promised land, came also at the expense of individuals who were in fact living there. Other Semitic people who continued to have lived within that part of that region, and they were primarily of the Muslim faith. They were primarily Arabic. And so hence the conflict, which is what we are seeing to this present day. And of course, a series of various wars which were fought by this newly minted state of Israel, coming out of that post-war era. Of course, being provided significant support by countries like the United States of America, where in fact probably the vast majority of Jewish people live today. I think there are about 15 million or so Jews around the world, and so it has certainly been able to hold on this very narrow little strip of land amongst a sea of persons who have a different faith, and quite often see this presence of that state as a sort of a scourge on what is effectively the Arab crescent. And so the issues that we have seen over the years, a lot of it has been about the treatment of the issues of Jerusalem and how that should be treated, and of course other regions where Palestinians have now been provided with their own effectively homeland, Gaza as well as the West Bank. But of course, when you even look at the region of Gaza, Gaza is a narrow, very small, narrow strip of land, very, very, very densely populated, with really no hinterland, no opportunity for any sort of significant agriculture or anything of the sort. And so there, of course, has been this point of conflict. And some may even say that even though we're hearing a declaration of war against Hamas, that the reality is that this area has always been in almost a state of perpetual warfare in some sense. The efforts over the years, of course, have seen efforts at building walls, building barriers, building checkpoints for control and for maintenance of the areas. In fact, it's somewhat ironic today as well, because the region that is largely Israel today is part of what would have been called before, I suppose, Canaan or Philistia, the lowland regions, whereas the area where the Judaism, the Jewish state really rose was actually in the hill country, Judea. And that area is now primarily the West Bank. And Israel really has much more of the flat lowlands areas today. But of course, a very significant conflict point, that of Jerusalem in the highlands, is still very much part of that challenge. Now, because, of course, of that association in Orthodox Jewish minds that, look, they have rights over the West Bank, that has, and by the West Bank, it really refers to the West Bank of the Jordan River. That region is quite often a point where there's a desire to settle. And so even though those areas are considered to be Palestinian, or should be Palestinian, we've seen considerable settlement in that area continuing and causing for continued conflict. So we're seeing what has happened now, and I think we do have a clip available which gives some context to the story there. So that I think is going to give you some sense as to what has unraveled over the past weekend, of course, which started off early Saturday morning with attacks by Hamas. Okay, our apologies. We seem to be having some technical difficulties there. But effectively, we saw multiple attacks, very much coordinated by Hamas, which involved missile strikes, which involved attacks on events which were going on. We saw kidnappings of individuals. And of course, it has been seen as a major failing of the Israeli intelligence services. They have been known to be some of the best in the world. Mossad and, of course, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. They, of course, have had to develop significant technology and ability to ensure that that state can survive. And it is doing so with the threat that it is so very easy for missile attacks to come, and it's a very narrow space. In fact, I think at its narrowest point, just about 8 miles. The width of that state. So it really can be attacked very, very easily in some respects. And so the concept of the development of an iron dome and being able to have defense systems to be able to protect the country has certainly been significant. And so their security services have very much been very well respected. And the act that has unfolded has certainly been described as what one would say has been a major failing of that of their system. Just very quickly, maybe we could just share a story coming out of the Washington Post, which describes the conflict and the chronology of that. The story written by Sammy Westfall and Brian Murray, Adam Taylor, and Brian Page, and it was updated just a short while ago. A surprise coordinated assault on Israel by Palestinian militants, one of the deadliest and most brazen attacks in years, brought renewed attention to an old and continuing problem, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has vexed the Middle East for decades. The death tolls has risen to more than 1,000 people, at least 700 Israelis, according to Israeli media, and 560 in Palestine, according to the local health ministry. Dozens of Israeli soldiers, citizens, and possibly foreign nationals have been taken as captives, according to Israeli Defense Force. Israeli media is reporting that more than 100 are missing. The roots of the conflict and mistrust are deep and complex, predating the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Both Palestinians and Israelis see the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea as their own. The past 7 decades have brought war, uprisings, and at times glimmers of hope for compromise. Here is a timeline beginning around 1948, including the latest violence in the Gaza Strip. World War I, the question of Palestine. The Ottoman Empire had controlled that region in the Middle East from the early 16th century until control of most of the region was granted to the British after World War I. Both Israelis and Palestinians were struggling for self-determination and sovereignty over the territory, developing respective movements for their causes. As World War I began, several controversial diplomatic efforts, some contradicting each other by the great powers, tried to shape the map of the modern Middle East, including the Palestinian territories. Palestinians cite a series of 1915-1916 letters between Mecca's emir and the British High Commissioner in Egypt as outlining a promise of an independent Arab state. In 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France determined that the land in question was to be internationalized. In 1917, Britain's then Foreign Secretary, Lord Arthur Balfour, expressed his government's support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people in a letter to Baron Walter Rothschild, the head of the British wing of the influential European Jewish banking family. To Israelis, the missive marked a formal utterance of the Israeli state's right to existence. To Palestinians, it was an early sign of their dispossession. The declaration also noted that it was clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Large-scale Jewish immigration followed in succeeding decades, especially during Nazi persecution. Both sides continued to assert their right to establish a state. 1948, Israel declares independence. After World War II, in 1947, nearing the end of the British mandate for Palestine, the United Nations General Assembly passes Resolution 181, urging the partition of the land into 2 independent states, one Arab and one Jewish. Religiously significant, Jerusalem is to be under special international administration. The plan is not implemented after the Arab side rejects it, arguing that it is unfavorable to their majority population. Violence in the region conflicts grows. Israel declares independence in May of 1948. The next day, a coalition of Arab states allied with Palestinian factions attack Israeli forces in what becomes the first of several Arab-Israeli wars. In the end, Israel gains control of an even larger portion of territory, not including the areas of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. An estimated 700,000 Palestinians flee or are driven from their land in what Palestinians referred to as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic. In July of 1956, the Suez Crisis. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal, a vital trade route connecting the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Israel invades Egypt, followed by forces from Britain and France. A peace deal, backed by the United States and Soviet Union, ends the fighting, but the canal is blocked by sunken ships and doesn't reopen until 1957. Into the Six-Day War, June of 1967. The Six-Day War begins. The war breaks out amid lingering conflicts, including Egypt's continued blockade of shipping into the Gulf of Aqaba. Israeli warplanes strike Egyptian airfields, and Israeli ground forces enter the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan joins the fighting alongside Israel, but Israeli forces have the upper hand after nearly wiping out Egypt's air power. Israel takes control of the Gaza Strip, Sinai, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and predominantly Arab East Jerusalem. The Arab armies suffer massive losses. The United Nations Security Council adopts a resolution calling for Israel to withdraw from the territory it claimed in the brief war. And into September of 1972, Black September and the Olympic attacks. At the 1972 Munich Summer Olympics, a group of Palestinian extremists from the group Black September raid the Olympic Village, where a dorm of Israeli athletes are housed. They kill 2 athletes and take 9 others as hostages, all of whom are killed soon after. October of 1973, an Arab coalition attacks Israel. A coalition of Arab nations led by Egypt and Syria launch a surprise coordinated attack on Israel on Yom Kippur, a Jewish holy day. The Arab forces initially gain ground but are driven back by an Israeli counteroffensive aided by supplies from allies, including the United States. There are heavy death tolls on both sides. Now, we're going to take a break from this chronology of events over the decades in Israel and Palestine because we actually are due to take in our weather report.
The Daily Dish.
The last major conflict in Israel was in 2021.
One tells for your home, I say. Bathroom, kitchen, pantry. Need tells for your balcony. Come down to Tells Plus satisfaction guarantee. Tells Plus, Tells Plus, Tells Plus. Big tells you unbeatable cost. Customer service, 8 plus 8. All kind of tells come down to Tells Plus. You'll see black, that's and vanity. You'll see. Come down to my nobody. We got the best tells on island. Trust me. We are located at Street in Castries. Bossy Jugo Ziles. And Flag Street in Viewport. Telephone number 453-793.
They were sent to the Israelis was very clearly deception.
Saturday's attack holds deep significance for Israel, as the country has just marked 50 years after the Yom Kippur War.
It was October 6th, which is an attack that was launched against Israel by Syria, Egypt, and several other Arab countries, and in which Israel was completely unprepared, had a very...
We're now going to take a look at our weather report for this hour. We do apologize. We're trying to get the audio for the links that Calixte is trying to get to you. So do forgive us for that. When we come back, hopefully we'll be able to play you those clips from that Calixte is trying to share. But it's now time for the weather report, and the weather report is made possible with the compliment
And welcome back to the Lunchroom here at Radio Caribbean International. And we have been discussing for our dish of the day thus far the latest giving some context to the latest Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which certainly has erupted over the weekend past as a result of attacks, a series of coordinated terrorist attacks by the group Hamas. And, some people, of course, may say that they're not terrorist attacks, but others, of course, have said that there's a war on, so this is the nature of war, but certainly a series of attacks. And, of course, we've also seen the matter of kidnappings of civilians and killing of civilians as well. We were just looking at a Washington Post chronology, looking at the conflict as far back as the beginning of the 20th century and World War I, and how that evolved, the issue of each country, each people, both the Palestinians as well as the Israelis looking for, Jewish people looking for having their own state. And we were into the 1970s and that period of conflict. And what came next was in 1978, the famous Camp David Accords, a peace agreement between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, known as the Camp David Accords, is brokered in September of 1978 by United States President Jimmy Carter. It lays the foundation to a peace deal between the two countries the next year, as well as a framework for a process of Palestinian self-government in the West Bank and Gaza. Potential Palestinian peace proposals were discussed but never carried out. In December of 1987, the First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising or intifada, brings largely spontaneous clashes, protests, and civil disobedience against Israeli occupation in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel, leading to harsh Israeli military crackdowns. Unrest continues for years, with many killed or injured on both sides. In 1993, we saw the Oslo Accords, the first of two pacts, known as the Oslo Accords, are signed between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, setting out a peace process based on previous UN resolutions and charting the expansion of a limited Palestinian self-rule in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. A follow-up accord was signed in 1995. The agreements create the Palestinian Authority to oversee most administrative affairs in those areas. The PLO is recognized by Israel and the United Nations as a negotiating partner. Left unresolved, however, are key issues such as Israeli settlements in the West Bank and the status of Jerusalem, which is viewed by the Palestinians as the capital of any future state. In 2000, the Second Intifada, or Palestinian uprising, begins after riots broke out following a visit by right-wing Israeli political figure Ariel Sharon, later Prime Minister, to a compound in Jerusalem that is venerated in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Clashes and other violence continue until 2005, leaving hundreds dead on both sides. In 2006, Hamas is elected in Gaza. Israel withdraws its troops from Gaza. The Palestinian militant group Hamas wins elections in Gaza, leading to political strains with the more moderate Fatah party controlling the West Bank. After Hamas's 2007 takeover of the Gaza Strip, Israel imposes a 16-year blockade on the small, overcrowded Palestinian enclave that's home to 2 million Palestinians. Limiting the mobility of goods and people in and out of the territory, Israel has deepened Gaza's humanitarian crisis, the United Nations says. Most Gazans live in refugee camps and rely on UN rations. The West Bank, home to 3 million Palestinians and more than 500,000 Jews living in settlements deemed illegal under international law, is occupied by Israel and subject to its military administration. Several rights groups have said that Israel's regime over Palestinians amounts to apartheid. In a 2022 report, Amnesty International said it analyzed Israel's intent to create and maintain a system of oppression and domination over Palestinians, including through territorial fragmentation, segregation and control, dispossession of land and property, and denial of economic and social rights. This is apartheid, it concluded. In December of 2008, Israel attacked Gaza. Israel begins 3 weeks of attacks on Gaza after rocket barrages into Israel by Palestinian militants who are supplied by tunnels from Egypt. More than 1,110 Palestinians and at least 13 Israelis are killed. In November of 2012, Israel kills Hamas's military chief. Israel kills Hamas's military chief, Ahmed Jabari, touching off more than a week of rocket fire from Gaza and Israeli airstrikes. At least 150 Palestinians and 6 Israelis are killed. In the summer of 2014, Hamas kills 3 Israeli teenagers. Hamas militants kill 3 Israeli teenagers kidnapped near a Jewish settlement in the West Bank, prompting an Israeli military response. Hamas answers with rocket attacks from Gaza. A 7-week conflict leaves more than 2,200 Palestinians dead in Gaza. In Israel, 67 soldiers and 6 civilians are killed. In December of 2017, U.S. recognizes Jerusalem as its capital. The Trump administration recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and announced that it plans to shift the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv, stirring outrage from Palestinians. In 2018, more protests in Gaza. Protests take place in Gaza along the fence with Israel, including demonstrators hurling rocks and gasoline bombs across the barrier. Israeli troops kill more than 170 protesters over several months. In November, Israel stages a covert raid into Gaza. At least 7 suspected Palestinian militants and a senior Israeli army officer are killed. From Gaza, hundreds of rockets are fired into Israel. In May of 2021, Israeli police raid the Al-Aqsa Mosque. After weeks of tension in Jerusalem led to Israeli police raiding Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam, Hamas fired thousands of rockets towards the city, prompting Israel to retaliate with hundreds of airstrikes. In the fiercest fighting since at least 2014, more than 200 were killed in Gaza and at least 10 killed in Israel. In the spring of 2022, string of terrorist attacks in Israel. A spate of violence on Israelis by Palestinians leaves 14 Israelis dead in a handful of attacks between March the 22nd and April the 8th. In response, Israel clamps down on militants and activists and launches the Break the Wave military operation in the West Bank, which makes 2022 a particularly deadly year. Israeli forces killed 146 Palestinians in the West Bank in 2022, a death toll higher than in any other year since the UN began keeping records in 2005. Israel's foreign ministry says Palestinians killed 29 Israelis that year. And of course, I should also mention that, of course, we saw this being the rise of the ultra-right in Israel at this time. In December of 2022, Netanyahu is sworn in for a 6th term. Benjamin Netanyahu is sworn in again as Israeli Prime Minister after winning an election that gives him his 6th term and elevates a once fringe bloc of far-right politicians into powerful seats. He cobbles together the most far-right government in Israeli history, which critics has already begun to crush any prospect of a two-state solution. It's also the most pro-settler government, with some members encouraging an expansion in settlement activity in occupied Palestinian territories. Settler violence against Palestinian civilians, with settlers emboldened by the government, has surged too. In January of 2023, the Israeli raid on Jenin. Israeli forces raid the Palestinian city of Jenin, killing 9 people in a shootout. The next day, a Palestinian gunman killed 7 people, including children, during prayers at an East Jerusalem synagogue. In the summer of 2023, retaliatory attacks flare. Tit-for-tat attacks flare. Israel launches surprise airstrikes across the Gaza Strip in May, killing 3 top militants and 10 others, including women and children, health officials say. That sets up a 5-day bout of violence that kills at least 33 people in Gaza and 2 in Israel. On June the 19th, Israeli forces raid Jenin, deploying helicopter gunships to the West Bank for the first time since the Second Intifada. The next day, 2 Hamas gunmen opened fire at a hummus restaurant at an Israeli settlement, killing 4 Israelis. Hundreds of Israeli settlers then rampaged through Palestinian villages, torching homes and cars and shooting at residents, according to local officials. Israel also carries out its first drone strike in the West Bank since 2006, killing 3 suspected militants. In July, Israel stages an air and ground attack with 1,000 soldiers backed by drone strikes against a refugee camp inside Jenin, killing 12 people. The operation marks the start of an extensive counterterrorism effort that the Israeli Defense Forces saw will continue indefinitely. In October, which of course is where we are now, in 2023, Israel says it is at war after Hamas attacks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu formally declares war on Hamas on Sunday, following a surprise assault by Hamas militants on the 50th anniversary of the start of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israel's Air Force begin striking Hamas targets in Gaza after Hamas militants infiltrate Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip, including by paraglider and over the sea, Israeli military leaders say. Israel says at least 700 Israelis have been killed. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a militant group in Gaza, says it is holding Israeli soldiers captive. Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli media are reporting that dozens of civilians have also been kidnapped, including the elderly, women, and children. Meanwhile, a Hamas military commander, Mohammed Daif, urges Arab neighbors, including Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, to start marching now, saying that it is time for the Arab resistance to unite. We call for the movement towards Palestine. A counterattack by Israeli forces in Gaza has killed more than 400 Palestinians, including 78 children. And that was a piece, a chronology published in the Washington Post, giving some context to the matter of what we've been seeing unfolding in Israel. I think we do have that clip available. It's a fairly short one, I think. It should not be more than 3 minutes. And I think we could perhaps try to wrap up with that. And of course, you will hear some words in Jewish. But of course that'll be from Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, we will provide the translation later. Let's take that clip in.
Explosions rumbled through the night after Israel declared war on Hamas on Saturday. Hamas, a militant group from Gaza, coordinated an unprecedented attack early Saturday on Israel by land, air, and sea, shocking the country and the world.
מה שקרה היום לא נראה בישראל, ואני אדאג שזה לא יקרה יותר. נכה בהם עד חורמה, וננקום בעוצמה על היום השחור הזה שהם עוללו למדינת ישראל ולאזרחיה.
And a senior official in Hamas said Saturday's attacks are only the beginning of the conflict.
The country right now is just going into fight mode, survival mode.
Though Israel and Hamas have been entangled in a decades-long conflict in Gaza, here's why this attack is different and what it could mean for Israelis and Palestinians.
This has never happened. Israel has fought many wars against its Arab neighbors, but it has never experienced anything like this, where Palestinians have actually come into Israel proper and committed such widespread attacks.
Hamas says it is dedicated to building an independent Palestinian state. The group controls the Gaza Strip, a densely populated Palestinian enclave that, for years, has been under Israeli blockade. The last major conflict between Hamas and Israel was in 2021, in which more than 250 people in Gaza and 14 in Israel were killed. The attacks only stopped after 11 days, when Egypt brokered a ceasefire.
Is most interesting is that in recent months, I would say that Israel has actually described Hamas as being somewhat more reasonable and more of a partner than some other elements within Palestinian society. And so it seems that whatever message they were sending to the Israelis, it was very clearly deception.
Saturday's attack holds deep significance for Israel, as the country has just marked 50 years after the Yom Kippur War.
It was October 6th, which is an attack that was launched against Israel by Syria, Egypt, and several other Arab countries, and in which Israel was completely unprepared, had a very similar experience. They were caught off guard.
Though caught by surprise, Israeli soldiers fought Saturday evening to regain control and expel militants from local towns and villages.
החמאס פתח במלחמה אכזרית ומרושעת. אנחנו ננצח במלחמה הזאת. אבל המחיר כבד מנשוא.
Rockets fired from Gaza lit up the sky Saturday night. Israeli forces used their Iron Dome air defense to intercept and destroy the rockets. The death toll from the initial attack remains unclear, as Israel scrambles to assess the situation. The UN said at least 20,000 people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes as of Saturday.
Just considering the fact that something like this is completely unprecedented, I would expect them to use all their resources, ground, air, and it's going to be devastating for the people of Gaza. I don't see any other way that this could possibly go. There's going to be a lot of lost lives all across the board.
And a piece coming from the Wall Street Journal. Apologies for not having the translation on the Hebrew, which was from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but effectively suggesting that they are going to be getting their revenge in this matter. Of course, Israel has been, over the past couple of months, been also even internally rocked by a number of protests which have been ongoing every weekend. And that is as a result of the current government seeking to limit and to change the powers of the Supreme Court. That has been very, very controversial, and many more liberal elements within the state of Israel have been looking at this with great concern. And so now, of course, this act coming, of course, as has been mentioned, on after half a century since the start of the Yom Kippur War. That's all the time we have today here at the Lunchroom. I'll be back again tomorrow, God willing, for another program. Hope you can join us for that.